Welcome back, Midnight Stories family. Get ready for another heart-touching tale. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now let's dive into today's story. The sound of muffled laughter filtered through the walls, faint yet unmistakable. Daniel stood in the dimly lit hallway of the upscale hotel, his pulse hammering in his ears. The sleek carpet beneath his feet seemed to stretch endlessly as he approached the door, the number etched in gold staring back at him like a cruel joke. Room 317. He had hoped he'd been wrong, that the pit in his stomach was a figment of his imagination. But the text messages he had seen on her phone left little doubt. With trembling hands he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen displayed a blurry image he had taken moments earlier, a snapshot of his wife, Amelia, stepping into this room arm in arm with a man he recognized too well. Her lover, his so-called best friend, Adam. The betrayal burned like acid in his chest, but he kept his composure. This wasn't the time to explode. No, he had planned for this. From behind the door, voices carried softly. Amelia's melodic laughter stabbed at him, each giggle a blade cutting deeper into his resolve. "It's perfect," she said. "I can't wait for the big day." Daniel clenched his jaw. She wasn't talking about their wedding anniversary next month. She was dreaming of a future he would never let happen. Not like this. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring at the faint scent of perfume seeping through the cracks. A scent he had once adored, now sickeningly sweet. He adjusted the small camera hidden in his pocket, ensuring it was ready. If they wanted a show, he'd give them one they'd never forget. But first, he needed to see it for himself, needed to confront the reality staring him in the face. His knuckles grazed the door before he paused. Was he really ready to tear apart everything in one fell swoop? A part of him hesitated, hoping he'd wake from this nightmare. But the other part, the part that felt betrayed and broken, took over. He raised his fist and knocked. The voices inside hushed. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching into eternity. Then the sound of hesitant footsteps approached the door. As shadows stretched across the dim hallway, a secret was about to unravel, one that would change everything. Daniel Thompson wasn't always the suspicious type. At 36 he had built a life that many envied. A successful contractor with a reputation for being fair and meticulous, he was the kind of man who worked with his hands and his heart. His marriage to Amelia, a bright and beautiful woman 10 years his junior, was the crown jewel of his life, or so he had thought. They lived in a charming home in the suburbs, the kind that gleamed in the sunlight and hid its secrets behind neatly trimmed hedges. Their lives appeared picture-perfect, a facade crafted over years of shared smiles and quiet compromises. But cracks had been forming beneath the surface for months. Daniel wasn't blind to the changes, though he wished he could unsee them. Amelia had become distant, her once warm and playful demeanor replaced with cold detachment. Late-night meetings and unexplained absences grew frequent, her phone always tucked away with a grip that felt uncharacteristically guarded. Yet, whenever he asked, her answers were laced with just enough plausibility to keep him at bay. "I'm just tired," she'd say, flashing a weary smile. "Work has been a nightmare lately." Amelia was a marketing executive at a prestigious firm downtown. Her career had taken off in the past year, earning her promotions and invitations to exclusive events. Daniel had been proud. How could he not be? But with her newfound success came longer hours and a string of work trips that often left him eating dinner alone. At first he told himself it was normal. She was chasing her dreams and he wanted to support her. Love demanded trust, didn't it? But love also demanded honesty, and that was slipping through their fingers like sand. Adam Carter was the other piece of the puzzle, Daniel's best friend since their college days. They had been inseparable once, sharing beers, heartbreaks, and dreams of a future where they'd conquer the world in their own ways. Adam had become a financial consultant, a charming and ambitious man who knew how to navigate any room with ease. Women were drawn to him, but his loyalty to Daniel had always seemed unshakable. Or so Daniel had believed. Looking back, the warning signs were there. Adam had started dropping by unannounced more often, his visits coinciding with Amelia's work nights. Their laughter would echo down the hall, leaving Daniel feeling like an outsider in his own home. He brushed it off as paranoia, chalking it up to his own insecurities, until he stumbled upon the text. It had happened by accident. Amelia had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. The notification lit up the screen, a message from AC. It read, Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 317 like always. His breath caught in his throat. He had stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. Against his better judgment, he unlocked the phone. What he found shattered any lingering doubts. Weeks' worth of messages, sweet nothings, shared jokes, plans for secret rendezvous, confirmed his worst fears. Daniel's world tilted. Betrayal was one thing, but from both of them? The two people he had trusted most in the world? The rage came in waves, hot and suffocating, but beneath it was a deeper, colder pain. He felt foolish, like a man who had been duped in the cruelest way. Yet, instead of confronting them immediately, he chose a different path. If they were playing a game, he would learn the rules. He would wait, watch, and strike when the moment was right. Amelia wasn't the villain Daniel wanted her to be. At least not entirely. She had grown up in a small town, dreaming of a life far beyond its limits. Marrying Daniel had seemed like the perfect escape. A man who was kind, steady, and endlessly supportive. But as the years went on, her restless ambition clashed with the quiet stability he offered. She loved him, but the spark that had once lit their early days was now a distant memory. She found herself longing for excitement, for something that made her feel alive again. Enter Adam. He was everything Daniel wasn't, spontaneous, daring, and unburdened by routine. Their connection had started innocently enough, a few shared laughs over dinner during one of his visits. But the line between friendly banter and forbidden attraction blurred quickly. Amelia hated herself for it, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. With Adam, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Adam, for his part, knew he was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But he thrived on risk. The danger of it all, the secret meetings, the stolen kisses, was intoxicating. He justified his actions with half-truths. Daniel would never find out. Amelia deserved more than a husband who was stuck in his ways. Yet, deep down, he knew his betrayal was unforgivable. He just didn't care enough to stop. Daniel's decision to follow Amelia that night wasn't impulsive. It was the result of weeks of careful planning. He had tracked her patterns, noting the nights she left the house under vague pretenses. He had invested in a small camera, discreet and effective, determined to gather undeniable proof. Tonight was the culmination of it all. When he saw her enter room 317 with Adam, it felt like a punch to the gut, but it also solidified his resolve. Standing outside the door, he couldn't help but think of the life they had built together. Their wedding day, the honeymoon in Italy, the nights spent dreaming of the future. It all felt like a cruel joke now. Had it all been a lie? Or had something real existed between them once, something that time and temptation had eroded beyond recognition? Behind closed doors, their lives were anything but ordinary, Daniel thought bitterly, his fingers tightening around the small camera in his pocket. As he raised his fist to knock, memories of his friendship with Adam flooded back. They had been through so much together, breakups, career struggles, even the death of Daniel's father. Adam had been his rock through it all, the brother he never had. And now he was the man who had destroyed his marriage. The door creaked open and Amelia's startled face appeared. For a moment their eyes locked and Daniel saw the truth written all over her expression. Guilt, fear, and something else he couldn't quite place. Before she could speak, Adam appeared behind her, his face paling as he registered who was standing at the threshold. Daniel, Amelia began, her voice trembling. Daniel took a step forward, his jaw set, his voice cold. Don't bother. I already know. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on all three of them. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of an unraveling, a reckoning that none of them would escape unscathed. When secrets erupt. The silence in the room was suffocating, like the air itself had frozen in place, trapping the three of them in an invisible web of tension. Daniel stood just inside the doorway, his eyes darting between Amelia and Adam. The two stood side by side, the gap between them narrowing with every moment of hesitation. It was as if their betrayal had physically drawn them closer, a united front against the storm Daniel had just unleashed. Amelia took a shaky step forward. Her lips moved, but no words came out at first, her mind scrambling to form an explanation where none existed. She knew she had been caught, there was no denying it. The weight of her guilt pressed down on her shoulders, but a small, stubborn part of her still hoped she could control the damage. This isn't what it looks like, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Daniel let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and biting. Not what it looks like. Are you seriously going to stand there and insult my intelligence? Adam cleared his throat, stepping forward as if to shield Amelia. Daniel, listen. Don't, Daniel interrupted, his voice low and steady, laced with venom. Don't you dare try to justify this. I trusted you, Adam. I trusted both of you. The months leading up to this moment played out in Daniel's mind like a cruel montage. He remembered the late nights he spent alone, staring at the untouched dinner plates he had prepared for Amelia. He remembered the laughter he overheard between her and Adam, their voices carrying an intimacy that made his stomach turn. And he remembered the moment he found the messages, an undeniable confirmation of the affair that had been tearing apart his life. Amelia's betrayal hurt deeply, but Adam's cut differently. They had been like brothers, bound by years of shared experiences and mutual respect. Daniel had been there for Adam when he lost his job, offering support and a place to stay until he got back on his feet. He had defended Adam when others doubted him, vouching for his character time and time again. And now here he was, standing in a hotel room with Daniel's wife, his face a portrait of guilt and regret. For Amelia, the affair had started as an escape, a way to feel alive again in a marriage that had grown stagnant. She didn't plan for it to go as far as it did, but the thrill of sneaking around, the forbidden nature of their relationship, had been intoxicating. Adam had made her feel desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. But now, facing Daniel's fury, the reality of her choices came crashing down around her. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling, I never wanted to hurt you. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Daniel shot back, his voice rising. Did you think you could just keep lying to my face, sneaking around like I'm some kind of idiot? Amelia flinched at the anger in his tone. She had seen Daniel angry before, but never like this. This was a deeper kind of rage, one born from betrayal and heartbreak. Please, she tried again, can we just talk about this? Just the two of us? Daniel shook his head. No. We're past that. This isn't something we can just talk our way out of. Adam, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Look man, I know I messed up. Messed up? Daniel cut him off, his voice dripping with disbelief. You call destroying my marriage messing up? You were my best friend, Adam. My brother. How could you do this to me? Adam looked away, unable to meet Daniel's gaze. The weight of his actions was finally hitting him, the reality of what he had done sinking in. But no amount of regret or apology would fix what had been broken. The stakes were higher than any of them had anticipated. For Daniel, the betrayal wasn't just about his marriage or his friendship. It was about the foundation of trust that had been shattered beyond repair. The life he had worked so hard to build was crumbling before his eyes, and he wasn't sure if he had the strength to pick up the pieces. For Amelia, the fallout extended beyond her relationship with Daniel. Her career, her reputation, even her sense of self-worth were all on the line. She had made a choice, a selfish, reckless choice, and now she had to face the consequences. And for Adam, the risk was even greater. He knew Daniel better than anyone, knew how deeply his friend valued loyalty and honesty. If there was one thing Daniel couldn't forgive, it was betrayal. And Adam had crossed that line in the worst possible way. What seemed thrilling in the moment was quickly spiraling out of control. The words echoed in Amelia's mind as she watched Daniel pace the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She had thought she could manage the affair, keep it hidden long enough to figure out what she really wanted. But now, with everything laid bare, she realized how foolish she had been. The thrill of the secret was gone, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. Do you have any idea what you've done? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. Do you even care? Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she didn't mean for things to go this far? None of it would make a difference. I trusted you, Daniel continued, his voice trembling with emotion. I gave you everything, Amelia. And this is how you repay me? The room fell silent again, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. For a moment, none of them moved, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Daniel turned to leave. You can keep your secrets, he said, his voice cold and detached. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you destroy everything we built. As he walked out the door, Amelia and Adam exchanged a glance, their shared guilt written all over their faces. They had thought they could control the situation, but they had underestimated the depth of Daniel's pain, and the lengths he would go to make them pay. What none of them realized was that this was only the beginning. The betrayal had set off a chain reaction, one that would force each of them to confront the darkest parts of themselves. And in the end, none of them would come out unscathed. Daniel's exit from the room wasn't the end, it was the match to a powder keg. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound reverberating through the sterile hotel corridor like a gunshot. But the fire wasn't out. He walked briskly down the hallway, his thoughts a storm of rage and grief. The air felt too thick, his breaths too shallow. The betrayal he'd just uncovered wasn't just a blow to his heart, it was a challenge to his very identity. Daniel wasn't one to let betrayal slide. He had to act, and quickly. Inside the room, Amelia collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. Adam hovered near the door, his mind racing for a plan, an escape route, or even a comforting word. None came. "Do you think he'll?" Amelia started, her voice barely audible. Adam cut her off, shaking his head. "He's angry. But he won't do anything crazy." The words sounded weak even to himself. He knew Daniel's temper better than anyone. Daniel was slow to anger, but once unleashed, it burned with relentless intensity. Back at home, Daniel sat in the dark living room, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. It wasn't just rage that coursed through him now, it was calculation. He'd spent years building a life with Amelia, trusting her implicitly. And Adam? He'd considered him family. Now he felt like a fool. A plan was forming in his mind, but it wasn't fueled solely by revenge. It was about exposing the truth. He opened his email and typed a single message, attaching the photos he had captured outside the hotel room. The recipient, Amelia's boss. The subject line, Amelia's true priorities. He hesitated for a moment before hitting send, knowing this was only the beginning. Next, he drafted a second email, this time to Adam's biggest client, highlighting concerns about his professional integrity with a vague warning that the attached images might prove enlightening. He didn't attach the photos this time. He didn't need to. Just the suggestion of impropriety would plant enough doubt. With every move, the walls seemed to close in tighter. 2 days later, Amelia's carefully constructed life began to collapse. Her boss summoned her into a meeting. The email Daniel had sent made its way to the upper echelons of the company, and whispers of impropriety spread through the office. Her boss didn't mention the photos directly but made it clear that Amelia's behavior was under scrutiny. The firm prided itself on its pristine reputation, and Amelia was now a liability. By the time she returned home that evening, her nerves were frayed. She found Daniel in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, sipping a glass of whiskey. "You did this, didn't you?" she accused, throwing her bag onto the table. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Did what exactly?" "Don't play dumb, Daniel. My boss called me in today. Someone's been spreading lies about me." "Lies?" Daniel's voice was calm, almost mocking. "I didn't have to lie, Amelia. The truth was enough." Amelia's face flushed with anger. "Do you think ruining my career will make you feel better? Do you think it'll fix this?" "Fix this?" Daniel's voice rose, his calm facade cracking. "You think this can be fixed? You tore it apart the moment you decided to sneak around with him." Meanwhile, Adam's life was unraveling at its own pace. The email to his client had done more damage than Daniel could have anticipated. The client, a cautious man by nature, had started asking questions. One rumor turned into another, and soon Adam found himself defending not just his personal integrity but his entire career. He tried calling Daniel, desperate for a chance to explain, to apologize, to plead. But every call went unanswered. Messages piled up in the void, each more frantic than the last. When Adam showed up at Daniel's office unannounced, Daniel didn't give him the courtesy of privacy. He let his assistant, and everyone else within earshot, hear every word. "You have the nerve to come here?" Daniel said coldly, standing tall behind his desk. "After everything you've done?" "Daniel, please," Adam started, his voice low. "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Daniel's voice cut through like a knife. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. What you did. That's not a mistake. That's betrayal." Adam's shoulders slumped, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but—" "You're right," Daniel interrupted. "You don't? The cracks in the facade of their lives widened. Amelia found herself ostracized at work, her colleagues' friendly smiles replaced with wary glances. Adam's professional reputation took hit after hit, his once solid client base shrinking as the rumors grew. And Daniel? He wasn't unscathed. Every time he looked at the empty side of the bed or past Amelia's untouched toothbrush in the bathroom, the pain resurfaced. But he told himself it was necessary. They needed to feel the consequences of their actions just as he was feeling them. Then came the unexpected twist. One night, as Daniel sat in his car outside Adam's apartment, watching for any sign of movement, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me at the cafe on 8th. Tomorrow. 6 p.m. He stared at the message, suspicion curling in his gut. Was this a trap? A ploy by Adam or Amelia to manipulate him? Or was there more to the betrayal than he had uncovered? The following evening, Daniel arrived at the cafe, his heart pounding. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a woman seated at a corner table. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and motioned for him to sit. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending a hand. "Adam's ex." Daniel hesitated before shaking her hand, his mind racing. "What do you want from me?" "It's not about what I want," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "It's about what you deserve to know." Over the next hour, Sarah revealed a side of Adam that Daniel had never seen. The charm, the calculated lies, the way he manipulated people to get what he wanted. "He's done this before," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "You're not the first friend he's betrayed, and Amelia isn't the first woman he's used." Daniel listened in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Adam's betrayal wasn't just a mistake, it was part of a pattern. And Amelia? She had been caught in his web just as others had before her. By the time Daniel left the cafe, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined, and the stakes were higher than he had realized. This wasn't just about his marriage or his friendship, it was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. As he drove home, one thought repeated in his mind: this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The cafe was quiet when Daniel left, the revelation Sarah had shared echoing in his mind like a chorus of damning truths. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove home, his knuckles white from the pressure. The man he had called his best friend wasn't just a betrayer. He was a predator, skilled at exploiting trust and manipulating people for his own gain. And Amelia? She was just one more person Adam had pulled into his web of deceit. But her complicity didn't absolve her. She had chosen this path, and now they would both face the consequences. Daniel spent the night pacing the living room, replaying Sarah's words. He couldn't sleep, not with the weight of everything pressing down on him. The betrayal had fractured his life into pieces he no longer recognized, and the only thing that kept him moving was the thought of justice, or revenge. He wasn't sure which anymore. The fallout began to spread like wildfire. Amelia's life continued its downward spiral. Her boss's vague warnings turned into direct confrontation when an anonymous tip suggested she had been using company resources to meet Adam. Though it wasn't entirely true, the whispers were enough. By the end of the week, she was placed on suspension pending an investigation. Amelia sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the letter from HR. Her hands trembled as she read the cold, impersonal words. She looked up at Daniel, who stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of anger and detachment. "Did you send this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Daniel's expression didn't waver. "I didn't have to. Your actions caught up with you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake, Daniel. I was confused. But you're destroying everything." "You destroyed it first," he replied, his voice cold. "I'm just making sure the truth doesn't stay buried." Adam's downfall was equally swift and brutal. One of his biggest clients, suspicious after Daniel's anonymous email, began digging into his personal life. The photos Daniel had taken outside the hotel eventually surfaced, sent from an untraceable account to key figures in Adam's professional network. The evidence was damning, and Adam's reputation crumbled overnight. Contracts were canceled, meetings rescheduled indefinitely, and colleagues who once admired him now avoided his calls. Desperate, Adam confronted Daniel one evening outside his office. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them both as they stood in the dimly lit parking lot. "Daniel, enough?" Adam shouted over the rain. You've made your point? Daniel turned slowly, his face impassive. I haven't even started. Adam stepped closer, his voice desperate. You think this is justice? Ruining my career, my life? What do you want from me? I want you to feel what I felt, Daniel said, his voice low but seething with emotion. To lose everything you thought you had. Adam's face contorted with a mix of anger and regret. I made a mistake, but this is cruel. So was betraying me, Daniel replied before walking away, leaving Adam standing alone in the rain. The turning point came a week later. Daniel received another message from Sarah. This time it wasn't just a warning about Adam's manipulative ways, it was evidence. Sarah had uncovered emails between Adam and another woman, someone high-profile enough to cause a media frenzy. The emails detailed not only their affair but also Adam's attempts to blackmail her for financial gain. Daniel sat in his car, staring at the documents Sarah had sent him. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was criminal. Adam had crossed lines even Daniel hadn't imagined, and now he had the proof to expose it all. But the question lingered, should he? Taking this step wouldn't just ruin Adam, it would drag Amelia further into the scandal. And despite everything, a part of Daniel still felt the sting of what they had shared. That night, Daniel confronted Amelia with the new information. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, when he dropped the printed emails onto the coffee table. What's this? She asked, picking them up. Her eyes widened as she read, her face draining of color. Your boyfriend's extracurricular activities, Daniel said, his voice sharp. Turns out he's not just a liar, he's a criminal. Amelia looked up at him, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Where did you get this? It doesn't matter, Daniel replied. What matters is what happens next. Amelia's hands trembled as she set the papers down. You're going to turn him in? Daniel nodded. And you're going to help me? Her eyes widened. What? No, I can't. You don't have a choice, Daniel interrupted. You've already lost your job, your reputation. Do you really want to go down with him? Amelia stared at him, her mind racing. She hated what Adam had done, hated herself for getting involved with him in the first place. But turning on him felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she could handle. Yet, as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw the determination there, the unshakable resolve. He wasn't asking, he was telling her. The fallout came swiftly and decisively. With Amelia's cooperation, Daniel turned over the evidence to the authorities. Adam was arrested within days, charged with multiple counts of blackmail and fraud. The media latched onto the story, painting Adam as a villain and Amelia as a naive accomplice who had been manipulated into his schemes. Daniel watched the news coverage from his living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. The satisfaction he felt was fleeting, replaced by a hollow emptiness. He had won, if this could even be called a victory. But at what cost? His marriage was in ruins, his trust in people shattered, and the life he had built was now unrecognizable. Amelia packed her bags a week later. She stood in the doorway looking at Daniel one last time. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't respond. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. As the door closed behind her, he let out a long, shaky breath. He was free, but the weight of everything that had happened still pressed down on him. In one moment, everything they thought they knew was shattered. The fallout was more than just headlines and court dates. It was in the silence that filled Daniel's once warm home. The emptiness clung to the walls like a lingering shadow, a reminder of everything he had lost. The satisfaction of seeing Adam behind bars and Amelia walking away felt hollow now. What Daniel had thought would be a clean break turned into an ongoing torment, the cost of exposing the truth heavier than he ever imagined. The night Amelia left, Daniel sat in the living room, staring at the untouched dinner he had prepared out of habit. He used to cook for two. Now, the clink of his fork against the plate echoed through the room like a cruel reminder of his solitude. He wanted to feel relief, triumph even, but all he felt was the weight of regret. Not regret for exposing them, he knew they deserved it, but regret for what he had become in the process. The public fallout. The media frenzy surrounding Adam's arrest turned into a feeding frenzy. News outlets dug deep into his history, uncovering a string of manipulations and financial misconduct that stretched back years. Every new revelation painted Adam in darker colors, and by association, Amelia's name was dragged through the mud. Headlines like From Success to Scandal, The Fall of Amelia Thompson dominated local news. Amelia tried to lay low, but the whispers followed her everywhere. Strangers stared at her in grocery stores, co-workers avoided her calls, and friends she once trusted turned away. She had once been the confident, ambitious woman who could light up any room. Now she was the cautionary tale people used as a warning about the dangers of temptation. One afternoon, Amelia sat in the corner of a coffee shop, scrolling through her phone. Every notification felt like another nail in the coffin of her old life. Her mother called, her tone filled with disappointment rather than sympathy. "Amelia," her mother said sharply, "what were you thinking? How could you let this happen?" "I didn't let it happen," Amelia whispered, tears threatening to spill. "It just spiraled." "Spiraled?" her mother snapped. "You destroyed everything, your marriage, your career. What's left?" Amelia didn't have an answer. She hung up, her hands trembling as she set the phone on the table. For the first time in years she felt truly alone. Daniel's struggle. For Daniel, the victory didn't bring peace. He found himself consumed by the aftermath, unable to focus on work or even the simple joys of life. His friends and coworkers offered sympathy, but it felt empty. They didn't understand the toll it had taken on him. He had exposed the truth, but it came at a price he hadn't anticipated. The loss of trust, the constant reminder of betrayal, and the gnawing question of what came next. One evening, as Daniel sat alone with a drink in hand, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah, Adam's ex, the woman who had given him the final pieces of evidence to bring Adam down. "How are you holding up?" the text read. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "I don't know. Some days I feel like I won. Other days it feels like I lost everything." A few minutes later her response came. "That's the thing about the truth. It sets you free, but it doesn't make the pain go away. Let me know if you ever want to talk." Daniel set the phone down, her words ringing in his mind. Freedom and pain seemed intertwined now, two sides of the same coin. Unexpected encounters. Weeks later, as Daniel walked into a hardware store to pick up supplies for a long-overdue home project, he ran into someone he hadn't seen in years. Alex, another college friend who had drifted away after graduation. Alex greeted him warmly, but the conversation quickly turned awkward when the topic of Adam came up. "I heard about what happened," Alex said, shifting uncomfortably. "Crazy stuff. I never would have thought Adam. Well, you know." Daniel forced a tight smile. "Yeah. Neither did I." Alex hesitated before adding, "But, some people are saying you went too far. That maybe you didn't have to burn everything down." The comment hit Daniel harder than he expected. Was that how people saw him now? A man so consumed by revenge that he had scorched the earth beneath him? He didn't regret exposing Adam's crimes, but hearing it framed that way made him wonder if he had become the villain in his own story. Amelia's attempt at redemption. Amelia, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life. Job interviews were met with polite rejections, her name too tainted to be a safe hire. Desperate for a fresh start, she began volunteering at a local women's shelter. It was there that she met others whose lives had been shattered, not by infidelity but by abuse, poverty, and addiction. Their stories humbled her, making her betrayal seem small in comparison. Slowly she found purpose again, though the weight of her past never left her. One day she wrote Daniel a letter. It wasn't an apology, she knew words wouldn't change what had happened, but a way to express her regret and gratitude. She thanked him for exposing the truth, even if it had destroyed her. She admitted her mistakes, acknowledging the pain she had caused, and wished him happiness in the life he deserved. Daniel read the letter late one night, his emotions a mix of anger and sorrow. He didn't respond, but he kept the letter in his desk drawer, unsure why. The unfinished chapter. Months passed, and the scars of the betrayal began to fade, though they never disappeared completely. Daniel threw himself into work, taking on bigger projects to fill the void. Amelia continued her volunteer work, finding solace in helping others. Adam remained in prison, his once bright future reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale. But the story didn't end there. Daniel found himself meeting with Sarah again, their shared experiences forming an unlikely bond. They spoke of betrayal, resilience, and the challenges of moving on. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a spark of hope, a glimpse of a future where the pain didn't define him. The cost of their choices was now impossible to ignore, but perhaps in time, they could all find a way to move forward. The storm outside was relentless, matching the tempest inside Daniel's mind. Rain hammered against the windows of his living room as he stared at the stack of evidence Sarah had uncovered. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, each one a damning piece of Adam's greed and deception. But it wasn't just Adam's name that appeared in the tangled web of transactions. Amelia's was there too. The sight of her name in black and white brought a fresh wave of anger, confusion, and worst of all, doubt. Amelia had insisted she hadn't known the full extent of Adam's crimes, claiming she was just a pawn in his schemes. But could he believe her? Could he afford to? If Daniel released this evidence to the authorities, it would bring Adam's empire crashing down, but it would also implicate Amelia. She might not face prison time, but her career, her reputation, and any shred of normalcy she had left would be obliterated. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table, the sharp vibration pulling him from his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Are you going to do it?" she asked when he answered, her voice steady but carrying a trace of urgency. Daniel exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "If I release this, Adam's done. It'll destroy him." "That's the point," Sarah said firmly. "He deserves it." "It's not just him," Daniel replied. "Amelia's name is on some of the transfers. If this goes public, she'll be collateral damage." Sarah's tone hardened. "She made her choices, Daniel. She wasn't innocent in all of this." Daniel's silence stretched, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "I don't know if I can do it. If I pull this trigger, there's no undoing it." "You already pulled the trigger when you started down this path," Sarah said softly. "Now you just have to finish it." Confrontation in the rain. Daniel couldn't sit still. He grabbed his keys and left the house, letting the pounding rain and roaring wind match the chaos inside him. He drove without a clear destination, the wipers barely keeping up with the downpour. Before he realized it, he found himself parked in front of Amelia's apartment building. The rain drummed on the roof of his car like an unrelenting heartbeat, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Finally, he stepped out into the storm, the cold rain soaking him instantly. By the time he knocked on Amelia's door, he was drenched. When she opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" she asked, pulling the door open wider. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Can I come in?" She hesitated but stepped aside, letting him enter. The apartment was stark and impersonal, a far cry from the warm home they had shared. Daniel took in the sparse furniture, the faint smell of coffee, and the few personal touches. A photo frame, a scarf draped over a chair. It felt like a temporary stop, not a home. "What's this about?" Amelia asked, wrapping her arms around herself. Daniel didn't sit. Instead, he turned to face her, his eyes piercing. "I need to know the truth. Did you know about Adam's scams? Were you involved?" Amelia's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know, Daniel. I swear I didn't." "But your name is on some of the transactions," he pressed. "How do you explain that?" "I don't know," she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "He said he needed help moving money for his clients. I didn't ask questions because I trusted him. I was stupid." Daniel stared at her, searching for any sign of deception. She looked broken, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. For the first time he believed her. "You know what this means, right?" he said finally. "If I release this evidence, you'll go down with him. The authorities won't care if you were just a pawn." "I know," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And maybe I deserve it." The last stand. The next morning, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at his laptop. The evidence was in front of him, a damning compilation of Adam's schemes. If he sent it to the authorities, Adam's empire would collapse. But it would also drag Amelia further into the scandal, even if she didn't deserve it. He thought about everything she had done, the betrayal that had torn their lives apart. But he also thought about the woman he had loved, the one who had once been his partner in everything. His phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. "Well?" she asked. Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm sending it to the authorities," he said. "But I'm leaving Amelia out of it." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her tone skeptical. "She was part of it, whether she knew or not." "I'm sure," Daniel said firmly. "She's lost enough. This ends with Adam." The fallout. The consequences were swift and brutal. Adam was hit with a cascade of new charges: fraud, embezzlement and conspiracy. The evidence was undeniable, and within days his remaining supporters abandoned him. His face was plastered across every news outlet, the fall of a once respected financial consultant now a national scandal. But Amelia's name was conspicuously absent. Daniel had kept his promise, ensuring her involvement was erased from the narrative. For her, the relief was bittersweet. She knew she hadn't escaped judgment. She would carry the weight of her choices for the rest of her life. Closure. One evening, as the storm clouds finally parted, Daniel met Sarah for coffee. The small cafe was quiet, the smell of fresh pastries mingling with the aroma of brewed coffee. They talked for hours, about Adam, Amelia, and the lives they were both trying to rebuild. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. The storm had passed, leaving behind scars that would never fully heal. But as he looked at Sarah and saw the strength in her eyes, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. As the truth emerged, there was no turning back, he thought. But sometimes moving forward meant letting go. The storm had long passed, but its echoes lingered. For Daniel, life had changed irreversibly. The house he had once shared with Amelia now felt like a shell of its former self, stripped of laughter, warmth, and the small moments that had once brought him joy. Every corner seemed to whisper memories he couldn't forget. The nights spent talking about dreams for the future, the meals shared at the worn wooden table, the times he had believed in the life they were building. All of it now felt like a story from someone else's life. The weeks after Adam's downfall had been a blur. There was no triumphant moment of satisfaction, no celebratory toast to justice served. Instead, there was an aching quiet that crept into every part of Daniel's world. He had destroyed Adam's empire and protected Amelia from the fallout, but the victory felt hollow. The truth, as Sarah had said, had set him free, but it hadn't taken away the pain. Amelia's search for redemption. Amelia's days were long and unremarkable now. The sharp suits and polished heels of her corporate life were gone, replaced by simple clothes and the humbling work of volunteering at the women's shelter. The first few days had been unbearable, strangers' eyes on her, whispers of pity and judgment from those who knew who she was. But over time, Amelia found solace in the stories of the women she met. Their struggles, against abuse, poverty, and systems stacked against them, put her own in perspective. One day, as she packed care packages with toiletries and warm blankets, a young woman approached her. "Thanks for doing this," the woman said, her voice soft but sincere. "It means a lot." Amelia smiled faintly, her heart twisting. "It's the least I can do." For the first time in months, she felt something close to purpose. Her choices had cost her nearly everything, but perhaps she could build something new, something better, from the ruins. Daniel's reflection. Daniel spent hours in his workshop, the scent of sawdust filling the air as he worked on a new project. He had taken on the job of restoring an old desk, its surface scarred and worn. The work was painstaking, requiring patience and precision, but it gave him something to focus on beyond his thoughts. One afternoon, as he sanded the rough edges, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How's the desk coming along?" Daniel smiled faintly, snapping a quick photo of the nearly finished piece and sending it to her. Her response came quickly. "Looks great. Maybe you'll inspire me to take on a project of my own." Their conversations had become a regular part of his days, a quiet source of comfort he hadn't expected. Sarah understood the weight he carried because she carried it too. Their shared experiences had forged a connection that felt genuine and unforced. A letter from Amelia. One evening, Daniel found an envelope in his mailbox. The handwriting on the front was familiar, Amelia's. He hesitated for a long moment before opening it. "Daniel, I don't know if I have the right to write to you, but I need to try. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did, what I lost, and what I put you through. I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I want you to know that I regret it every single day. Thank you for sparing me from the worst of the fallout. You didn't have to, and I didn't deserve it. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I hope one day you can find peace, even if it's not with me. You were the best part of my life and I ruined it. I'm sorry. Amelia." Daniel read the letter twice, his emotions a confusing tangle of anger, sadness, and something softer, pity perhaps. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, unsure if he would ever respond. Moving forward, months turned into a year. The house no longer felt like a prison, though the scars of what had happened remained. Daniel had finished the desk, and it now sat proudly in his study, a symbol of something broken made whole again. He and Sarah continued to see each other, their connection deepening with time. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and healing. They didn't talk about Adam much anymore, though his shadow lingered. Instead, they focused on the lives they were building, piece by piece. One evening, as they sat together on Daniel's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah turned to him. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" she asked gently. Daniel thought for a long moment before replying. "I don't know if I can. But I've stopped letting it consume me. That's enough for now." The story wasn't one of redemption for everyone. Adam remained behind bars, his name synonymous with greed and betrayal. Amelia found a small measure of peace in her volunteer work, but the life she had once envisioned was gone. And Daniel? He carried the weight of the choices he had made, but he also carried the hope of a future unburdened by the past. As silence fell, the echoes of their choices lingered in the air. Flashback or hidden truth reveal, the forgotten puzzle piece. The past has a way of creeping back even when buried deep. As Daniel sat in his workshop late one evening, surrounded by the familiar hum of tools and the faint scent of sawdust, his mind wandered to a memory he had long tried to suppress. It was a moment from years ago, during the early days of his marriage to Amelia, back when their love felt untouchable, unshakable. It was a time when trust hadn't been fractured, when they had believed they could weather anything together. A memory resurfaces. It had been a rainy autumn afternoon. Daniel and Amelia were curled up on the couch, a rare day off they both managed to spend together. The TV flickered in the background, but their attention wasn't on the screen. Amelia had just returned from a networking event for work, excitedly recounting the people she had met and the opportunities she saw ahead. "I met someone interesting," she had said, her eyes lighting up. "His name is Adam Carter. He's sharp, ambitious, and, get this, he went to school with you. Small world, right?" Daniel remembered laughing at the coincidence. "Yeah, Adam and I go way back. He's a good guy, though we haven't stayed in touch much since college." Amelia had smiled then, her enthusiasm infectious. "He thinks so highly of you. Said you always had his back." "Sounds about right," Daniel had replied, unaware that this casual conversation would plant a seed that would grow into something destructive. Back then, he hadn't noticed the slight hesitation in her voice when she spoke of Adam, or the way her eyes lingered just a little too long on the business card he had given her. It wasn't until much later, long after their friendship with Adam had deepened and Amelia's work hours grew longer, that Daniel had begun to connect the dots. The missing conversation. The memory was like an itch he couldn't scratch, and as he sat alone in the workshop, he realized there was more to it. Another moment came rushing back, one he had dismissed at the time. It was during a dinner party they had hosted at their home, with Adam among the guests. Daniel had been in the kitchen, refilling drinks, when he overheard a snippet of a conversation between Amelia and Adam on the back porch. "I don't know," Amelia had said, her voice low but tinged with uncertainty. "It feels like I'm stuck sometimes. Like I've lost myself." "You don't have to feel that way," Adam had replied, his tone smooth and confident. "You're too talented, too bright to let anyone hold you back. Not even Daniel." Daniel had stepped onto the porch then, his presence cutting the conversation short. Amelia had smiled at him, the tension evaporating as if it had never been there. But the words stuck with him, a tiny crack in the foundation of their relationship that he had ignored. The reveal. The pieces clicked together now, years later. That dinner party, that rainy afternoon, those moments were the beginning. They were the subtle shifts that had set everything in motion, the cracks that Adam had exploited with precision. Daniel realized that Amelia's betrayal hadn't started with an affair. It had started with her dissatisfaction, her unspoken fears, and her belief that Adam offered something Daniel couldn't. But there was another layer, a hidden truth Daniel hadn't seen until now. As he sifted through the memories, he recalled something Sarah had said when they had first met. "Adam has a way of finding people's weaknesses," she had told him. "He makes them feel special, seen, like he's the answer to everything they're missing. That's how he got to me, and that's how he got to Amelia." It wasn't just Amelia who had been manipulated. It was Daniel too. Adam had wormed his way into their lives, planting seeds of doubt and division, all while presenting himself as a trustworthy friend. A letter hidden in plain sight. Driven by a need for closure, Daniel found himself rummaging through old boxes that night. Among the mementos of a life he barely recognized, he stumbled across a folded piece of paper tucked into an old book. It was a letter written in Amelia's handwriting but never addressed to him. Dear Adam, I don't know how to put this into words, but I feel like you understand me in a way no one else does. I'm not proud of these feelings and I'm terrified of what they mean. I love Daniel, but sometimes I feel like we've lost something. Or maybe I've lost something. You make me feel alive again and that scares me. I don't know where this is going or if it should go anywhere. But I needed you to know how I feel. I don't know what else to do. Amelia. Daniel stared at the letter, his chest tightening. She had never sent it, or at least she hadn't given it to Adam directly. Maybe she had written it as a way to process her feelings, or maybe she had hidden it, unsure of what to do. Either way, it was a glimpse into a version of Amelia he hadn't seen before. A woman torn between loyalty and longing, fear and desire. Confronting the truth. The discovery of the letter didn't absolve Amelia, but it shifted Daniel's perspective. Her betrayal wasn't black and white. It was steeped in shades of gray, rooted in vulnerabilities he had ignored and emotions she hadn't shared. And Adam? He had preyed on those weaknesses, weaving a web that ensnared them both. Daniel felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and understanding. The pain of what had happened remained, but for the first time he could see the humanity in it, the flawed, messy reality of people making choices they didn't fully understand. The present. When Daniel met Sarah for coffee the next day, he brought the letter with him. He slid it across the table, watching as she read it silently. What do you think? He asked, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Sarah sighed, folding the letter carefully. I think Amelia was human. And Adam, he knew how to use that. Daniel nodded, his thoughts heavy but clearer than they had been in months. It doesn't change what happened. But it makes me wonder if I could have done more, if I could have seen it earlier. You can't change the past, Sarah said gently. But maybe understanding it is enough to help you move forward. The echo of choices. The past had crept back, bringing with it truths Daniel hadn't wanted to face. But in those truths he found something unexpected, not forgiveness but acceptance. The choices they had all made, his, Amelia's and Adam's, had brought them to this point, but they didn't have to define where he went next. The past has a way of creeping back even when buried deep, Daniel thought as he left the cafe. But this time he wasn't running from it. He was ready to let it go. Help can come from the most unlikely places, or so it seemed. It had been 6 months since Daniel had exposed Adam's crimes and begun rebuilding his fractured life. He was slowly finding a sense of normalcy, though his days still carried the weight of everything that had happened. The house was quieter than ever, the void left by Amelia's absence sharp and undeniable. His routine was simple. Work, evenings spent in his workshop, and the occasional coffee with Sarah, who had become a steady presence in his life. But the calm he had carved out for himself was shattered the day he received a call from an unfamiliar number. Daniel Thompson, the voice on the other end asked. It was smooth and professional, but there was a hint of something sharper beneath it. Yes, this is Daniel, he replied cautiously. This is Laura Hastings. I'm Adam Carter's sister. Daniel froze. Of all the people he had expected to hear from, Adam's sister was not one of them. He barely remembered her, save for a brief mention from Adam during their college days. Her voice carried a tone of urgency, making it clear this wasn't a casual call. I think we need to talk, she continued. It's about Adam, a meeting of shadows. Daniel hesitated but agreed to meet Laura at a small cafe downtown. She was already waiting when he arrived, a tall, striking woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through him as he approached. Thanks for meeting me, she said, motioning for him to sit. Her demeanor was poised, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her movements. I'm not sure what this is about, Daniel said, his tone wary. If you're here to defend your brother. I'm not, Laura interrupted firmly. I'm not here to defend Adam. I'm here to figure out how deep his lies go. Her words took Daniel by surprise. He had expected hostility, maybe even a plea for leniency, but not this. Go on, he said, leaning forward. Laura pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, emails, financial records, and notes that painted a picture even darker than what Daniel had uncovered. Adam's crimes were more extensive than anyone realized, spanning years and implicating more people. I've been digging into Adam's dealings ever since your evidence came out, Laura explained. What I found, it's worse than I thought. He didn't just betray you. He betrayed our family too. The deeper betrayal. As Daniel scanned the documents, his stomach churned. Adam hadn't just manipulated friends and clients. He had siphoned money from their parents' retirement accounts, leaving them on the brink of financial ruin. Laura's discovery added a new layer of betrayal, one that made Daniel's anger resurface in full force. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Because I need your help," Laura said, her expression earnest. "I want to take him down for good, but I can't do it alone. You've already started the process, and I think together we can make sure he never gets the chance to hurt anyone else." Daniel hesitated. Working with Laura felt like a risk. She was Adam's sister, after all, and trusting her meant exposing himself to someone who might have her own agenda. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something he hadn't expected: determination and a flicker of shared pain. "All right," he said finally. "What's the plan?" The plan unfolds. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Laura worked in secret, piecing together the remnants of Adam's schemes. Laura's insights into Adam's habits and connections proved invaluable, giving them access to information Daniel wouldn't have been able to uncover on his own. But as they delved deeper, the lines between ally and potential adversary blurred. One night, as they pored over a set of suspicious transactions, Laura's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face tightening. "Who is it?" Daniel asked. "No one," she said quickly, shoving the phone into her pocket. But her reaction was too sharp, too defensive, and it set off alarm bells in Daniel's mind. Suspicion creeps in. Over the next few days, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was keeping something from him. Her dedication to taking down Adam seemed genuine, but there were moments, like the phone call, when she seemed distracted, even evasive. He decided to test her loyalty. During their next meeting, Daniel casually mentioned a name he had come across in the documents, a name he hadn't shared with her yet. "So, what do you think about Mark Weston's role in all this?" he asked, watching her closely. Laura hesitated, her expression flickering for just a moment before she recovered. "I think he's just another one of Adam's pawns," she said smoothly. But the hesitation was enough to confirm Daniel's suspicions. She knew more than she was letting on. The confrontation. That evening, Daniel confronted Laura directly. They met at his house, where he laid the documents out on the table, along with his growing doubts. "What aren't you telling me?" he demanded. "You knew about Mark Weston before I mentioned him. What's your connection to all of this?" Laura's face hardened, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might walk out. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as the facade cracked. "Fine," she said. "You're right. I haven't been completely honest with you." She sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "Mark Weston isn't just one of Adam's pawns. He's my husband. Or he was. We separated years ago, but Adam used him to funnel money into accounts I didn't even know existed." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So you've been protecting him?" "No," Laura said quickly. "I've been trying to protect my parents. Adam threatened to expose Mark's involvement unless I kept quiet. I didn't know what to do, so I came to you, hoping we could find a way to stop him without destroying everything." Trust and betrayal. Laura's revelation left Daniel reeling. Her motives were more complex than he had realized, driven by a mix of guilt, fear, and desperation. He didn't know whether to trust her or cut ties entirely. But as he looked at her, he saw the same determination he had felt when he first uncovered Adam's betrayal, a need to make things right no matter the cost. "All right," he said finally. "We'll finish this together. But no more secrets." "No more secrets," Laura agreed, her voice steady. The turning point. With Laura's full cooperation, they uncovered the last pieces of Adam's schemes. The evidence they gathered not only solidified the case against him but also implicated other key players, including Mark Weston. It was a bitter pill for Laura to swallow, but she didn't waver. The day they handed everything over to the authorities, Daniel felt a strange sense of closure. Adam's empire was finally dismantled, and the damage he had caused was being unraveled piece by piece. Moving forward. As Laura and Daniel parted ways, there was no promise of friendship or continued contact, only a shared understanding of what they had accomplished together. Laura returned to her family, determined to help them rebuild, while Daniel took another step toward rebuilding his own life. Help can come from the most unlikely places, or so it seemed. The hardest choice. Some choices leave scars no matter which path you take. Daniel sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the faint hum of the heater the only sound breaking the silence. The room felt colder than usual, though he wasn't sure if that was from the winter chill outside or the weight pressing down on his chest. In front of him sat the neatly arranged folder of evidence. Pages of documents, emails, and transactions that painted a damning picture of Adam's greed and deceit. But it wasn't just Adam's name in those files. Amelia's name appeared again and again, entangled in ways he couldn't ignore. He leaned back, running his hands over his face. For weeks, he had pushed forward with a single goal: to expose Adam, to dismantle the life of the man who had betrayed him. But now, the reality of what that meant was staring him in the face. If he submitted this evidence to the authorities, Amelia wouldn't walk away unscathed. She claimed ignorance, insisted that she had been manipulated, but her name was tied to too many transactions. The courts wouldn't care about her excuses. She would be dragged down alongside Adam, her life in ruins. Daniel's jaw tightened as he stared at the folder. He thought about what Amelia had done to him, the lies she had told, the nights she had spent in Adam's arms while he sat at home believing in a future that no longer existed. A part of him wanted to let the evidence speak for itself, to let her face the full weight of her choices. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman he had loved, hesitated. Did she deserve to lose everything? Was he any better if he destroyed her completely? A walk down memory lane. Unable to bear the suffocating silence of the house, Daniel grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The cold night air stung his cheeks as he walked aimlessly through the quiet streets. His feet carried him toward the park where he and Amelia used to go on lazy Sunday afternoons. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut, her laughter echoing as she tried to skip stones across the pond, her teasing smile when he failed miserably. He sat on a bench overlooking the now frozen water, his breath visible in the crisp air. It had been years since those carefree days, but they felt like they belonged to another life entirely. How had they gone from that to this? How had the love they had built turned into a battlefield of betrayal and regret? Sarah's advice. The following morning, Daniel met Sarah for coffee. She had become his sounding board in the aftermath of everything, her own history with Adam giving her a unique perspective on the situation. As they sat in the corner of the cafe, Daniel laid everything out for her, sparing no detail. "What do I do, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low and weary. "If I submit this, it takes Adam down for good. But it'll destroy Amelia too. She says she didn't know, but you're not sure you believe her," Sarah finished, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You don't trust her anymore and I don't blame you." Daniel nodded. "So what's the right thing to do? If I protect her, it feels like I'm letting her off the hook. But if I don't?" He trailed off, the words caught in his throat. Sarah sighed, setting her spoon down. "The right thing isn't always the easiest. Sometimes it's not even clear. But you have to ask yourself this. What's your goal? Is it justice or is it revenge?" Daniel frowned, her words cutting deeper than he expected. "It's not revenge," he said after a long pause. "At least, I don't think it is." "Then you need to figure out what justice looks like for you," Sarah said gently. "And for her. Because once you make this decision, there's no going back." A late-night revelation. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a tangle of doubts and regrets. His thoughts drifted to the letter he had found weeks earlier, the one Amelia had written but never sent. Her words echoed in his mind, "I don't know where this is going or if it should go anywhere. But I needed you to know how I feel." It was a glimpse into a version of her he hadn't seen before, a woman who was lost, conflicted, and human. She had made terrible choices, but hadn't he done the same in his own way? His relentless pursuit of the truth had consumed him, leaving him unrecognizable even to himself. At some point in the early hours of the morning, Daniel rose from bed and went to his study. He sat at his desk, staring at the folder of evidence once more. His hand hovered over the phone, ready to make the call that would seal Amelia's fate. But something stopped him. The decision. By dawn, Daniel had made his choice. He called Sarah, his voice steady but resigned. "I'm submitting the evidence," he said. "But I'm leaving Amelia out of it." Sarah was silent for a moment before replying. "You're sure about this?" "I am," Daniel said. "She'll have to live with what she did. That's punishment enough." The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the authorities acted swiftly. Adam was hit with additional charges, his empire dismantled piece by piece. The media coverage was relentless, but Amelia's name was conspicuously absent. For her, the relief was short-lived. Though she avoided legal repercussions, the weight of her actions still hung over her like a dark cloud. Daniel, too, carried the scars of his decision. He had chosen to spare Amelia, but it hadn't erased the pain of her betrayal. Yet for the first time in months he felt a sense of clarity. He had done what he believed was right, even if it hadn't been easy. Some choices leave scars no matter which path you take, Daniel thought as he stood in his workshop, the scent of sawdust filling the air. But scars were a sign of healing, and he was ready to move forward piece by piece.